All right, well, I got to tell you real quick that as I was walking out of the door today to come here, my 14-year-old daughter, Sienna, she grabs me, and she was actually pretty serious when she grabbed me. And she said, "Dad, I just got to tell you something." She goes, "You know, you're going to be, there's going to be an empty room. We're doing church online this weekend, and so that means there's not going to be anybody in the room. Everybody's going to be out there." And she goes, "You know, you're going to have to be better than you normally are." And then she was like, she goes, "And I just want you to know real quick, if you don't talk like you believe these things, people are just going to turn you off." And so, listen, I think that's probably kind of, I don't know if that was a warning. I don't know if that was a prophecy. I don't know if that was her way of giving me a pep talk. But I just want to say, no matter what it was, thank you for not turning us off at this point. And also, I would just tell you, for some of you, this is your LCBC dream. Because for the first time ever, you are in charge of the volume of the music. And you are loving life right now. And so enjoy it while it lasts, because it will not always be that way. And no matter what, man, we're just real glad that you're here with us. And let me just say a few things before we jump into what we're going to be talking about today. I just want to encourage you to really lean in while we're in this season where we're on Church Online, lean into this platform. And I can tell you right now that our staff is working really hard, and they've got some incredible ideas in the days ahead that we're going to be telling you about, ways to keep you engaged with our church, ways to keep you engaged with each other, and also ways to keep you engaged with our communities. We want to continue to be the church that cares for our communities in the days ahead, and our staff is working up and cooking up some really cool ideas and some plans that we're going to be telling you about coming up that we're starting to get real excited about. And so here's what I would say. The best way to keep engaged with us and to stay connected is if you're not subscribe to or following our social channels, you need to do that. Make sure you're following us on all of our social channels. Make sure you're checking the website regularly, and then also make sure you've downloaded our app, because that's how you're going to stay connected to everything that we're doing here over the next foreseeable future. And so the other thing I'll just say real quick is just as you're engaging even with our our weekend gatherings online, we've created a chat feature and we've created a prayer request feature. So make sure, join in the conversation. We've got staff from all our different locations who are navigating those chats and who would love the opportunity to pray for you, who would love the opportunity to respond to any questions you might have. And so, again, we're just leaning into this, and we're seeing this as a God-given direction and a God-given opportunity for us to continue to be the church. And let me just say this as we kind of jump in today. Some messages are very practical, and some messages end up being real kind of challenging, and some messages end up being real inspiring, and some messages are just kind of they kind of go for the punch. Here's my hope today. I just hope this message and our hope for our time together here is that I just want this to be encouraging to you today. I just want the things we're going to talk about today, I just want you to leave our time together encouraged. Especially kind of in the season that we're in right now, I just want you to be encouraged. I have no doubt that what David said just a moment ago is absolutely true. It is no coincidence that we are right in the middle of this series that we've called Detours, in the middle of what is a massive detour. And we've defined detours over the last couple of weeks as really an unexpected change of direction. That's what a detour is, an unexpected change of direction. And man, we are in the middle of one. We're in the middle of a detour as a country right now. We're in the middle of a detour in our communities. We're in the middle of a detour as a church. We weren't expecting this, and yet here we are. And it's just no coincidence that we're in the middle of this series when we face a moment like we're facing right now. And I know that so many of you've experienced your own personal detours that you're facing in your life. And really the big idea behind this entire series, and really why we've got to talk about some of these things is this. The quality of our life is not determined by the detours that we face. It's not the detours that determine the quality of your life, but rather it is how we respond to those detours. That's really sort of the burden behind everything we've been saying over the last couple of weeks, and that we're going to continue to talk about. That it's not the detours that are the thing. It's not the detours that are an issue. It's how we respond in the middle of detours. And you know this to be true because you've seen this before in your life. You've seen two different people go through the exact same circumstances. You've seen two different people go through the exact same set of detours, and yet they both came out on the other side very different. One came out on the other side jaded. One came out on the other side bitter. One came out on the other side angry, cynical. And then you know someone else who went through the same kind of thing, the same kind of detour, and yet they still have joy. And there's a sense of peace in their life. And they came out and their faith was actually expanded. Their faith was emboldened. They're not bitter. And that's all because, look, at the end of the day, it's not the detours, it's how we respond to the detours that determines the quality of our lives. And the way we've been talking about it over the last several weeks, because we all have to wrestle with this question of how we're going to respond to the detours. And we've been just kind of saying that life it's kind of like a journey. And every one of our lives, our journeys has a starting point, and every one of our journeys has an ending point. And if you've been here, then you know that we've been saying that really the most important part of all of our journeys is, and again, if you're a Christian, you believe that ultimately birth and death is not the only part of our story, that there's eternity at stake. That there's an eternal God who's created us out of love, who longs to spend eternity with us. That death is not the end of our stories. And the way that the biblical vision kind of plays out is just says there's two eternal realities. And one is heaven, and the other is hell. And heaven is really just our being right in the fullness and in the center of God, to live eternally with the Creator of our souls. And then hell is really just a way of talking about to be eternally separated from the God who created us in love. And this is ultimately, honestly, why we always talk about this idea that the most important question you and I will ever have to wrestle with is, what will you do with Jesus? Because we believe that Jesus answers the questions about eternity. That Jesus is the one who brings us into union with the God who created us in love. And Jesus not only changes, though, and this is so important, Jesus not only changes our eternity, but this is really sort of centered to everything we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, is that Jesus also changes our day in and day out, our right now, not just our one days, but this day. And when we begin to think about this day, this is where we begin to talk about detours, because life works not in a straight line from start to finish, but it is full of ups and downs, twists and turns. These are the detours. Life doesn't go from here to here in a one straight line. We have detours. We have unexpected changes of directions all over the place. And those detours tend to be brought on, so we've been unpacking this, is that sometimes it's the people in our lives that bring about a detour, an unexpected change of direction. Sometimes it's just the circumstances that we face. We don't have any choice over them. And sometimes it is our choices. And all of these things just matter deeply in how we navigate our detours. And then there's a fourth, and it's just God. That God is in the middle of our detours. And so we've just been unpacking these. We've been saying these things influence and shape the journey and really are always at work in the middle of our detours. And today I want to talk about one person in particular. A guy who is, in a lot of ways is a central figure in the scriptural story, in the biblical narrative. His name is David. He was a king, and David knew all about detours. And David had all of these things working in the middle of his journey and in his detours. He knew there was a guy at one point, his name was Saul, and Saul was the king, and Saul did not like David at all. He made it known. And in fact, there's this one point in time where David has to run into the wilderness, has to hide out in caves. It is a detour. It was an unexpected change of direction. David did not expect to find himself having to live in a cave, and yet it was because of Saul chasing after him. David knows what it's like to have circumstances shift and change our detours. David, at one point, when he was a child, a little guy, his father sent him to go find his brothers to give him lunch, to give his brothers lunch because they were fighting on the front lines of a battle. And so David takes this lunch. He didn't make the choice to do it. It was just circumstances. He shows up, and then he finds out that there's this giant named Goliath who's threatening Israel. And so David goes out and he says, I'll take care of this. And he does. He goes out and takes care of it. And that one circumstance, him just going to deliver lunch, begins to change the direction of his life. Choices had everything to do in David's life in shaping his journey and the detours that he went on. We learned last week, if you were here last week, if you weren't, go check it out, but we learned last week that David makes this one very destructive choice at one point. And he has an affair with a woman named Bathsheba, and it ends up destroying two sets of families because of his decisions, and it leads him on an unexpected change of direction because of his choices. And all along the way, in David's life, as he goes through his journey and as he faces the detours of his life, all along the way, David writes and he prays and he sings songs and it's like he reflects and he meditates on where God might be in all of this. And we have a collection of these writings that David had. We call them the Psalms. They're right in the middle of the Bible. And so many of them were written by David. And as he begins to reflect on, God, where are you in the middle of my detours? God, where are you? Because David begins to give voice to some of the questions that we all tend to ask in the middle of our detours. Questions like, God, where were you? And God, are you still around? And God, are you doing anything? Because it feels like you're silent right now. And God, will you be there? And God, am I going to be okay? All these kinds of questions that tend to erupt when we're in the middle of a detour. And there's one psalm in particular where David becomes convinced. It's almost like he wants us to know that he has become convinced that there are two powerful realities about God that we can discover in the detours if we will just lean in. That there's two realities about who God is. Then if we can grasp these realities about who God is in the middle of the detours, it has the potential to unlock peace for every one of us, for us to live with a sense of peace, even when everything else around us is falling apart in the middle of our detours. It's one of the most famous Psalms that he probably wrote. It's been read a lot. It's been read in different settings. Maybe you've heard some of it. It's Psalm 23. And I'm just going to read the Psalm. It's 6 verses. And man, it has everything to talk to us today about detours and where God is. This is how he starts the Psalm. David says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need." So David starts this particular psalm with this agricultural picture, this picture of God being our shepherd. Now just think about this for a second. If God is our shepherd, if God is the shepherd, well, what does that make us? That makes us, you can say it in your little living room right now or with your friends or wherever you are. If you're at Starbucks and you're watching on your phone right now, just say it. That makes us sheep. And I'm just imagining, if you're at Starbucks, you got your headphones on, you just said sheep out loud, you're the weird sheep guy right now. Everybody's looking at you. But yes, it makes us sheep. And think about this for a second. Sheep are dependent on a shepherd, right? Sheep are helpless without a shepherd. Sheep need a shepherd to lead them to where the life is. And David's point, when he begins the psalm by saying that the Lord is our shepherd, I have everything I need, it's not really about our character. It's not about the sheep. It's really about the shepherd. It's about God's character, about who God is. Because a shepherd knows his sheep. A shepherd counts every one of his sheep. A shepherd knows who's strayed and who hasn't. A shepherd knows where to lead them, and a shepherd always has the best interests of his sheep in mind. And that's why David goes on to say this, the very next statement. He says, he, God, this good shepherd, he lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. I love the words in this. Rest, peace, renewal, strength, guidance. I don't know about you, but I have needed that in my life at various seasons. And I don't know if there's any time that I need that more than when I'm in a detour, that we need that more than we feel like we are in an unexpected change of direction in our life. And I love this phrase because I feel like David knows, because David was a shepherd at one point as he was growing up. So David knows the motivations of a good shepherd. And the motivations of a good shepherd are always for the good of his sheep. Always. And David uses this one little idea here when he says he lets me rest in green meadows. He's kind of painting this picture that a good shepherd will always lead the sheep from patch of grass to the next patch of grass. And David's writing this in the Middle East. And so David knows that, in the Middle East, if you were in Palestine or you were in Israel, then you would see that most of the landscape around that region is barren. Most of it's arid. It's rocky. There's not a lot happening. There's not a bunch of lush green vegetation. But what David knows and what he's experienced, because he had been a shepherd, was that every now and then water will blow up off the Mediterranean Sea, and that moisture will cause patches of grass, lush grass, to pop up at different places. And so a shepherd will have his sheep and they'll eat in that grass, and then the shepherd will lead them away and lead them to the next patch of grass. But here's the catch. And man, this is so important. Here's the catch. They had to walk from one patch of grass to the other. And that walk might have been a long walk. And that walk was through barren, arid, sandy, rocky soil. And it didn't look like there was anything good in that moment. But the shepherd always knew where he was leading the sheep, towards green grass. I know, this is like the shepherd would be like, I know this is rocky soil. I know there's nothing to eat. I know it feels dry here. I know it feels barren here. I know you just want to be on the other side, but I'm going to get you there. I'm taking you somewhere good. But just because it's dry and rocky and arid, that does not mean the shepherd isn't taking you somewhere good. And David is saying, you want to talk about detours? I mean, I've had my share. I've had a lot of detours in my life. But I have discovered that the God who knows you best knows what's best for you. Your good shepherd, the God who knows you best, he also knows what's best for you. Even when it feels like he's not leading you anywhere good, even when it feels like you're in the middle of a detour and you're wondering, where is this thing going? The God who knows you best knows what's best for you. He is leading you somewhere good. He will always lead you towards what's good. This is why David says he leads us along right paths. Right paths. And that's a fascinating statement. When David said he leads us along right paths, that's an amazing statement to me, particularly in light of what David says next. It says, all right, you want to know what some of those right paths are? Well, sometimes it might be dark paths. He says, even though it's right path, even though I walk through the darkest valley, even though I walk through the darkest valley, that might be where the path leads sometimes. He goes, I will not be afraid. And David could have just left it here. David could have just said, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, period, end of story. I don't need to write anything else. And that would have been a really good pep talk. And that would have been like, okay, David's saying, just get up your courage. Don't be afraid. Just kind of walk forward. But David doesn't end it there because he wants us to know. He wants you to know. He wants me to know why he's not afraid, even in the middle of really dark detours. He wants us to know why he's not afraid. And it's not because, he doesn't say, I will not be afraid because it's going to be over soon. Nope, that's not what he says. And he doesn't say, I'm not going to be afraid because, this detour really doesn't matter, so just pull up your bootstraps and go, just pretend like it doesn't matter. No, that's not what he says. He says, you want me to tell you why I'm not afraid? I will not be afraid. Why? For you are close behind me. God, you're close. You haven't left me. You are near me. You have not abandoned me. And listen, I realize that some of you today, you are in your own dark valley. You're in a detour, and that detour is painful. And it has left you afraid. It's a diagnosis, or it's the fear of a diagnosis. It's a sickness, or it is a fear of a sickness. It's rejection, or it's the fear of rejection. It's layoffs, or it's the fear of layoffs. It's betrayal, or it's the fear of betrayal. I don't know, but I just know that some of us today, you're sitting there and you feel like you know what it feels like to be in that dark valley. And I just want you to know that when we find ourselves in detours that feel dark like that, man, that is fertile ground for fear and anxiety. This season that we are in right now as a nation, this season that we're in right now as communities, this is fertile ground for fear and anxiety to set in about the economy, about jobs, about health, about wellness, about a million different things. But I cannot overstate what David is saying in this statement right here. He's saying, look, at the end of the day, you've got to know this. You've got to lean in on this. You have not been left behind. God has not left you behind. This is why he says that even though I walk through the valley, I will walk through the darkest valley. He says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, you're with me. In other words, God is walking through those detours with us. He doesn't walk us around them. He doesn't walk us over them. He walks with us, beside us, close, intimate, through them. And that has always been the story of God, guys. Always. God is not detached. God is not far. God is not a big man upstairs. God is not distant. He is close, always with us. And this is put on display no more clearly than in Jesus, who just, a few centuries after David wrote these words, Jesus steps on the scene. God in the flesh takes on flesh and blood to be with us, near us, skin to skin. And his willingness to enter into our world and to be with us leads him to a cross through a dark valley for us to be with us. This has always been the story of who God is, that he walks through these detours with us. And my guess is that for some of you, if you were being completely honest, you are ready to put faith back up on a shelf. You're about done with the thing. For some of you, your faith feels like it has been fracturing and kind of splintering. For some of you, you've given up on faith. You just haven't told people yet, but you've given up on it. For some of you, you walked away from a long time ago. And here's why I'm bringing all that up. I just have to believe that for some of us, the reason why your faith is fracturing, the reason why you walked away from it is because somewhere along the way, someone put promises in God's mouth that God never made. Someone told you that you just have to have more faith, and if you just have more faith, you're going to get what you want. And then if you just pray with more sincerity, you'll find healing. And then if you just honor God with your life, everything's going to be up and to the right for you. And then you hit a detour. And it wasn't a small one. It was a dark valley kind of detour. And your faith and the foundations for which you thought you were building your faith on began to crack and crumble. And if that's you, man, I think what David would say to you, and what I would encourage you with about every fiber of my being right now, is please do not hold God accountable for promises that God never made. God never promised that you and I would have a valley-free life, that we would have a detour-free life. But he always promises his presence to be with us in the detour. And David comes along and says, man, I have experienced detours. I know what it's like. And the one irrefutable fact that I have discovered, the irrefutable reality that I've discovered in the middle of my detours is that God is always close. He is here. He is with me. He is seeing me through this. Not around it, not over it, but with me in it. And then David says, but that's not all. It's not only that I've discovered that God is close, but he says there's also one other thing I've discovered that you got to know. And it's almost like he wraps up with these two last verses, and it's like he changes the metaphor. He moves away from shepherd, and now he changes the metaphor to almost talking about God as a generous, gracious host of a large banquet. Because look what he says next. He says, not only is God always close, but you need to know this. He said, God, you prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You are a gracious host. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessing. God, you have something good for me. David is describing the character of God here. Because it's almost like David's saying, okay, I not only want you to know that God is close in your detour, because you could think of God as being close, and it's kind of like God is like a cranky old grandpa close. Like, all right, I got to walk with you, fine. Let's just get this over so I can get back to my newspaper. Like some of you, that's what you think maybe if God is close. Like he's begrudgingly doing it. Like he's close because he has to, because he's God. But he doesn't really want to be close. He just has to. And David's saying, whoa, before you go down that road, man, you got to know about who God is. He's like, God is not just putting up with you in your detour. God is not close because he has to be. God is always for his people. He wants to abundantly pour out blessing, to feed us good things, to do good things for his people. This is why David goes on and says this to wrap up the psalm. He says, surely your goodness, God, your goodness, and your unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. Surely, I'm confident. Take it to the bank. If there's anything I know, it's this. Surely. He said, man, I have walked through detours. David said, I can tell you about them all day long. Some of them I brought on myself. Some of them have been circumstances. Some of them have been the people in my life. But man, I know dark valleys. I know detours. I know unexpected changes of direction. And he says, and I can tell you, because I've tasted it, and I've seen it, and I've experienced, God has never stopped being good. Never. He has never stopped loving, and he has never stopped pursuing. This morning, I woke up my son Solomon, and Solomon's 1, and so yes, that means I have a 14-year-old and a 1-year-old, and whatever, that's a detour. But anyways, Solomon, I go to get him this morning, and he's the cutest little thing, and I go and I get him, and I pick him up, and he kind of nuzzles up to me or whatever, and then I put him down. He wants to get down, and the first thing he does after I put him down is he runs away from me. And Solomon can walk perfectly fine, but I noticed he kind of ran away from me a little bit, his little feet pitter-pattering through his room, and then he looked back on me, and then he got on his hands and knees like he's crawling, and then he just started crawling as fast as he can away from me, and he would crawl for like 4 feet, and then he would turn around, and he would look. So he'd crawl, and then he would turn around, and he would look at me, and he'd smile. And then he'd crawl another 4 feet, and then he'd turn around, and he'd look at me, and he'd smile. Why did he keep turning around? What was he wanting to see? What was he wondering whether or not I was doing? Whether I was chasing him? Whether I was coming after him? Whether I was pursuing him? And it struck me. What is it in a child? No one had to teach Solomon to do that. No one taught him to do that. There's something in him that longs for that. What is it in a child that longs to be chased and pursued? See, I think that there is an imprint on our souls. There is an imprint on your soul, on my soul. There's an imprint on all of us that we just want to know. There's a longing inside of every one of us that we just want to know that no matter where we go, no matter what we do, no matter who we become, no matter how far we run, no matter what happens in life, that there is still someone who will pursue us, who will love us enough to keep chasing after us. And David says, you have a heavenly Father who answers the longings of your heart. A heavenly Father who will never stop pursuing you with his goodness and his love. And this is such good news for some of you right now. Because some of you, you are in a dark detour, and you are filled with fear and anxiety. And if you were being honest, for some of you, you have begun to think that maybe the reason you're in your detour is God is punishing you, or God has abandoned you, or maybe it's karma, or maybe God's getting you back for a decision you made at spring break, or a decision you made 2 weeks ago, or a decision you made 20 years ago. And I just want you to know that God will never stop pursuing you. He hasn't wiped his hands of you and said, nothing I can do about this one. He will always chase you. David says, surely, take it to the bank. You can rest in this. And he says, and all my future will be determined by these realities right here. It's almost like David says, man, I have built my life on these two pillars of who God is in the middle of my detours. And it's this: God is always close, and God is always good. Always. God is always close. And God is always good. And guys, I cannot think of a more relevant message in this season that we are in right now than this. To remind ourselves, to be encouraged that God is always close and God is always good, no matter what. That we do not have to live with fear, that we do not have to give in to anxiety, that we don't have to live as if tomorrow is unsure. We know that there is a God, no matter what detours we face, there is a God who is always close and a God who is always good. We can have confidence in these two realities, no matter what detour we are on. That even if everything around us is in chaos, these two realities about who God is and his character do not change, ever. They are unshakable. So I just want to ask you, as we wrap up, which do you need to hear most today? Which one of these do you most need to hear? Which one of these do you most need God to embed into your heart right now? That he's always close to you? You need to be reminded of that. Because you've begun to think he's distant. No, he's walking through it with you. Or that he's good. That he's still pursuing you in love. Because this is an invitation. Every detour is an invitation to experience more of God and who he is. Because God is close and God is good. And it's our decisions in the middle of that will determine whether or not we open our eyes to this reality. But he is always close and he is always good.